Robert Kensington was not asleep. His eyes were closed, his breathing slow and measured, but beneath his eyelids, the 60-year-old billionaire was fully alert. He sat in his leather recliner in the marble-floored study of his Manhattan penthouse, appearing to be just another wealthy man taking his afternoon rest. But Robert was hunting. His body was perfectly still, slumped just enough to look natural. His head rested against the high back of the chair at an angle that suggested deep sleep. His chest rose and fell in the slow, steady rhythm of someone lost in dreams. His hands lay relaxed on the armrests, fingers slightly curled. To anyone watching, he was the picture of a tired old man drifting through an afternoon nap. But beneath that carefully constructed facade, Robert's mind was razor-sharp. Alert, calculating. Every sense was tuned to maximum awareness. He was listening for footsteps, waiting for the rustle of paper, preparing to catch someone in the act of revealing their true nature. Before you see what happens next, take a moment to like this video, subscribe to this channel, Now's Haven, and stay with us, because the choice this young boy makes will test your faith in people, and what it does to a billionaire's heart will be impossible to forget. Over 6 decades, Robert had built something extraordinary. His real estate empire stretched across Manhattan and beyond, towering skyscrapers that pierced the clouds, their glass and steel facades reflecting his ruthless ambition. He owned banks that moved billions of dollars daily, their vaults holding more wealth than most people would see in 10 lifetimes. Investment firms, commercial properties, luxury hotels. His name appeared on Forbes lists and business magazines. His decisions could shift markets. His phone calls could make or break careers. Robert Kensington had everything a man could dream of: private jets, multiple residences, art collections worth millions, cars that cost more than houses. He had power. He had influence. He had more money than he could spend in 3 lifetimes. But he didn't have trust. And he hadn't had it for a very long time. The erosion had been gradual, like water wearing away stone. His ex-wife, Catherine, had been the first major crack. 23 years of marriage had ended in a divorce that lasted longer than some wars. She'd walked away with half his fortune, billions of dollars, and hadn't looked back. The woman he'd built an empire for, the woman he'd trusted with everything, had shown her true colors when the lawyers got involved. It wasn't about love. It had never been about love. It was about money. It was always about money. Then came Marcus, his business partner of 15 years. The man Robert had trusted with his companies, his investments, his future. Marcus had smiled at him across boardroom tables while secretly embezzling millions. By the time Robert discovered the theft, Marcus had already disappeared to a country with no extradition treaty, leaving behind nothing but falsified records and a mocking paper trail. Another person Robert had trusted. Another betrayal. But the deepest cut, that came from his own daughter. Jennifer was 32 now, and Robert couldn't remember the last time she'd called just to talk. Every conversation started the same way, with pleasantries that lasted exactly 90 seconds before she got to the real reason for the call. She needed money for a luxury apartment in Paris. She needed money for a new sports car. She needed money for a business venture that would inevitably fail. She needed. But what she never needed was him. Just his bank account. Year after year, person after person, Robert had learned the same brutal lesson. Everyone had a price. Everyone was greedy. Everyone would take what they could get if they thought they could get away with it. Rich or poor, family or stranger, it didn't matter. Human nature was fundamentally corrupt. Greed was the only constant. So Robert had developed a test. A game, perhaps, though calling it a game made it sound frivolous when it was anything but. It was research, scientific observation, a way to prove, over and over again, what he already knew to be true about humanity. The test was simple, elegant even. Robert would pretend to be asleep, vulnerable, unaware, an easy target, and he would leave bait. Money, usually. Sometimes jewelry or other valuables. Things that were visible, accessible, tempting. Things that looked like they'd been carelessly forgotten by a rich old man who had too much to keep track of. Then he would wait and watch what people did when they thought no one was looking. He'd conducted this test dozens of times over the years. New staff members, business associates, even people who claimed to be friends. The results were always the same, with a depressing consistency that would have made any scientist proud. Given the opportunity, given the belief that they wouldn't get caught, people stole. They lied. They took what wasn't theirs. Every single time. Today's bait sat on the glass coffee table beside his chair, positioned perfectly within arm's reach. A crisp stack of $100 bills, exactly $3,000, held together by a simple silver paper clip. The bills were new, still stiff from the bank, their green faces crisp and inviting. They sat there carelessly, visibly, as if Robert had been counting them before dozing off and had simply forgotten to put them away. $3,000. To Robert, it was pocket change. Less than he spent on a single dinner at his favorite restaurant. But to someone struggling to make ends meet, someone working paycheck to paycheck, someone drowning in bills and debt, $3,000 was life-changing. It was rent for 2 months. It was groceries for half a year. It was the difference between keeping the lights on and sitting in the dark. It was irresistible bait. Outside the study's floor-to-ceiling windows, rain hammered against the glass like bullets, each drop exploding on impact. The storm had rolled in from the Atlantic that morning, turning the Manhattan skyline into a gray watercolor painting. Thunder rumbled in the distance, a low bass note that vibrated through the building's steel frame. Inside, the study was warm and quiet. Classical music played softly from hidden speakers embedded in the walls. A piano concerto, something by Chopin, delicate notes dancing through the air like ghosts. The lighting was dim, just bright enough to see but dark enough to suggest afternoon drowsiness. A lamp on the mahogany desk cast a golden circle of light that didn't quite reach Robert's chair, leaving him in comfortable shadow. The stage was set perfectly, every detail calculated, every element designed to create the illusion of opportunity, of a wealthy old man sleeping unguarded with his money exposed. Robert waited, his breathing slow and steady, his face peaceful and relaxed. Somewhere in the penthouse, he knew his newest housekeeper was working. Grace Williams. She'd been with him for only 3 weeks. He barely knew her, just another face among the rotating staff who cleaned his home and then disappeared into their own lives. But today was different. Today, Mrs. Patterson had mentioned something about Grace needing to bring her son to work. Something about schools being closed due to the flooding. Robert had pretended not to care, had waved it away with the dismissive gesture of a man who had more important things to think about. But he cared. He cared very much. Because a desperate mother with a child to feed? That was perfect. That was ideal. That was exactly the kind of person whose true nature would be revealed by $3,000 in cash sitting unguarded on a table. The rain continued its assault on the windows. The piano concerto built toward its crescendo. Robert kept his breathing steady, his body still, his mind alert and waiting. Today, someone would reveal their true nature. Today, his cynical worldview would be proven correct once again. Today, he would catch another person choosing greed over integrity, confirming everything he believed about humanity. Robert Kensington waited in his leather chair, a wealthy hunter setting a trap for the poor, believing he already knew exactly how this story would end. He had no idea how wrong he was about to be. The study door opened quietly, almost apologetically, and Grace Williams entered, followed by hesitant footsteps that were smaller, lighter. Robert's jaw tightened imperceptibly beneath his mask of sleep. A child. She'd actually brought a child into his home, into his private study. The audacity of it would have been impressive if it weren't so predictable. Desperation made people bold. Desperation made people break rules they'd normally respect. Through his closed eyelids, Robert couldn't see Grace, but he didn't need to. He'd reviewed her file thoroughly when Mrs. Patterson had hired her 3 weeks ago. Grace Williams, 30 years old, though the years hadn't been kind. Her employee photo showed a woman with tired eyes and a forced smile, the kind of smile people wore when they'd forgotten what genuine happiness felt like. The background check had painted a bleak picture. Single mother. Widow. Her husband, Marcus Williams, no relation to Robert's treacherous former business partner, thankfully, had died from pancreatic cancer 2 years ago. The medical bills had been catastrophic. Even with insurance, the debt had been crushing. Grace had been left with nothing but bills and a 7-year-old son named Ethan. She worked 3 jobs now, according to Mrs. Patterson's notes. housekeeper for Robert in the mornings, waitress at a diner in the afternoons, night shifts at a convenience store on weekends. She lived in a cramped studio apartment in the Bronx, one room that served as bedroom, living room, and kitchen all at once. The kind of place where cockroaches outnumbered the square footage. Robert knew all of this. He knew everything about the people who entered his home. Knowledge was power, and power was protection. Mrs. Patterson, his head of housekeeping for the past decade, had come to him yesterday with an unusual request. The public schools were closing today due to flooding from the storm. Grace had no family in the city, no friends who could watch Ethan, and certainly no money for a babysitter. She'd begged Mrs. Patterson for permission to bring the boy to work, promising he would be invisible, silent, no trouble at all. Mrs. Patterson had been reluctant. It was against policy, after all, but she'd advocated for Grace. She's a good worker, Mr. Kensington. Reliable. Honest. And she's desperate. If we say no, she'll have to miss the day, and I don't think she can afford to lose the wages. Robert had agreed with a dismissive wave of his hand, as if it didn't matter to him either way. But it mattered very much. Because a desperate mother with a hungry child? That was the perfect test subject. Ethan, baby, listen to me carefully. Grace's voice cut through his thoughts, barely above a whisper but sharp with urgency. The exhaustion Robert had read about in her file was evident in every syllable. This was a woman who worked herself to the bone and still couldn't get ahead. Mr. Kensington is sleeping. You must sit in that corner by the bookshelf. Do you understand? Yes, Mama. The voice was small, young, barely audible over the rain still drumming against the windows. Don't touch anything, Grace continued, and Robert could hear her moving closer to the child, probably kneeling down to his level. Don't make a sound. Don't move from that spot. If you wake him, Mommy loses this job. Do you understand how important this is? The fear in her voice was palpable. Raw. Real. She wasn't just worried about losing a job. She was terrified. This job was probably the difference between keeping that apartment and being evicted. Between eating and going hungry. Yes, Mama, Ethan repeated, his small voice carrying a weight no 7-year-old should have to bear. I have to clean the kitchen, Grace said, her words coming faster now, more urgent. I'll be back in 15 minutes. Please, baby, be good. Please. I promise, Mama. Robert heard Grace's footsteps moving toward the door, quick, nervous, reluctant. She didn't want to leave her son alone in here, but she had no choice. She had work to do, and the clock was ticking. The door clicked shut with a soft, final sound. Grace was gone. Silence settled over the study like a blanket. Just the rain. Just the piano concerto reaching its gentle conclusion. Just Robert's measured breathing and the presence of a 7-year-old boy somewhere across the room. The boy will take it, Robert thought with cold certainty. Poverty breeds desperation. Desperation breeds theft. It's simple economics. Basic human nature. The mother is working herself to death and still can't make ends meet. The child knows they're poor. He can see that money sitting there. $3,000. Life-changing money. He'll take it. They always do. Robert kept his breathing steady, his body relaxed, his face peaceful. He was patient. He'd played this game many times before. He knew how it worked. Now it was just Robert and the 7-year-old boy. The test had begun. For a long time, there was silence. Only the rain and the soft piano concerto filled the room. Robert listened with the intensity of a predator. His ears were tuned to catch every sound. The scrape of small shoes against marble, the rustle of clothing as a curious child explored forbidden territory, the telltale whisper of paper as small fingers reached for money that wasn't theirs. He expected the inevitable sounds of childhood mischief. A bump against furniture. The clink of a valuable object being examined. The shuffle of feet moving where they shouldn't go. But there was nothing. Just rain. Just music. Just silence. 1 minute passed. Then 2. Then 5. Robert's neck began to cramp from holding his head at the same carefully calculated angle. A dull ache spread down his spine from maintaining the slumped, sleeping position. He wanted to shift, to adjust, to relieve the growing discomfort. But he held perfectly still. He'd endured worse discomfort in boardroom negotiations that lasted hours. He could handle this. The boy hadn't moved. Not a sound. Not a whisper of movement. Interesting, Robert thought. But children can be patient when they're scared. He's probably sitting there, working up courage, waiting for the right moment. They always move eventually. Children were naturally curious creatures. Robert knew this not from personal experience. Jennifer had been raised by nannies and boarding schools, but from observation. Children touched things. They explored. They pushed boundaries. And poor children were hungry for things they didn't have. Hungry for toys they'd never own. Hungry for experiences they'd been denied. That hunger made them bold. That hunger made them take risks. The boy would move. It was only a matter of time. Then Robert heard it, a soft rustle of fabric. The whisper of movement. The boy was standing up. Every muscle in Robert's body tensed imperceptibly. Here we go, he thought with grim satisfaction. The little thief is making his move. Took longer than most, but the result will be the same. Footsteps began crossing the marble floor. They were slow, hesitant, careful. The footsteps of someone who knew they were doing something they shouldn't. Each step seemed to take an eternity. Robert tracked the sound, calculating distance and direction. The boy was moving toward his chair. Toward the money. Robert visualized the scene with crystal clarity. The small hand would reach out, hovering over the bills for just a moment of hesitation. Then the fingers would close around the cash. The paper clip would come loose. The money would disappear into a pocket or be clutched in a small fist. And then Robert would open his eyes, catching the boy red-handed. He'd call for Mrs. Patterson. Grace would be fired on the spot. Mother and son would be escorted out, another confirmation of Robert's worldview complete. Never trust anyone, not even children, especially not desperate children with desperate mothers. The footsteps stopped. The boy was standing right beside his chair now. Robert could sense the presence, the small body heat, the slight disturbance in the air. He was so close, maybe 2 feet away, close enough that Robert could almost feel the child's breath. This was it, the moment of truth, the inevitable betrayal. Robert waited for the rustle of paper, waited for the grab, waited for his cynicism to be validated once again. But the grab never came. Instead, Robert felt something completely unexpected, something that made no sense in his carefully constructed narrative of human greed. A small, cold hand gently touched his arm. The touch was light as a feather, barely making contact. Not grabbing, not taking, just touching, tentative, concerned. Robert fought every instinct to flinch, to break character. What is he doing? His mind raced. Checking if I'm dead. Trying to wake me? Some kind of distraction before the theft? The hand withdrew slowly, carefully, as if afraid of disturbing him. Then Robert heard something that shattered his expectations completely. A small, shaky breath. Not the sound of excitement or greed. Not the sharp inhale of someone about to commit a crime. It sounded almost like a stifled sob, like someone trying desperately not to cry. The silence stretched out, heavy and confusing. Robert's mind scrambled to make sense of what was happening. This wasn't following the script. This wasn't how the test was supposed to go. Then Ethan spoke, his voice trembling with an emotion Robert hadn't anticipated. An emotion that cut through his cynicism like a knife through silk. "Please don't be sick, sir," the boy whispered, his words barely audible over the rain. "Please don't die like my daddy did." Robert's chest constricted. His carefully maintained breathing pattern nearly faltered. "What?" Robert's chest constricted. "What?" The words echoed in his mind, refusing to make sense. "Please don't die like my daddy did." This wasn't part of the test. This wasn't how people were supposed to behave when confronted with easy money and no consequences. Before Robert could process what was happening, he heard the sound of fabric moving, a zipper being pulled down. The boy was taking off his jacket. What is this kid doing? Robert's thoughts spiraled with confusion. Getting comfortable? Making himself at home before he steals? Then Robert felt it, something soft and warm settling over his chest and shoulders. The weight was slight, barely there, but unmistakable. Through the barest crack in his eyelids, Robert glimpsed what Ethan was doing. The boy was draping his own hoodie over Robert's upper body like a blanket. It was a faded thing, worn thin from too many washes, with a barely visible superhero logo across the front. There was a hole in one elbow, carefully stitched with thread that didn't quite match. The fabric was damp from the rain outside, but the boy was placing it over Robert with the careful attention of someone performing an important task. "Mama says when people fall asleep sitting up and breathing heavy, sometimes they're sick," Ethan murmured, his small voice cracking with genuine worry. "She says we have to keep them warm and call 911 if they don't wake up. But I don't want to get Mama in trouble." The boy's voice broke on the last words, and Robert felt something he hadn't experienced in years: shame. Hot, burning shame that spread through his chest like acid. This child wasn't seeing a billionaire. Wasn't seeing a test subject or a target or an opportunity. He was seeing someone he thought might be ill. Someone who might be dying, like his father had died. Someone who needed help. Robert's entire worldview trembled on its foundation. Ethan noticed the money on the table. Robert's heart began to race, pounding so hard he worried the boy might hear it. Here it comes. Now, this is when the mask falls. This is when the real motivation shows itself. But the sound that reached Robert's ears wasn't the rustle of paper being grabbed. It was different, paper sliding carefully across glass. Controlled. Deliberate. Through his barely cracked eyelids, Robert watched in stunned disbelief as Ethan pushed the stack of bills toward the center of the table, away from the edge where they'd been precariously balanced. "There," Ethan whispered to the man he believed was unconscious. "Now it won't fall and get lost." The boy wasn't taking the money. He was protecting it, saving it from falling, making sure Robert wouldn't lose it. Robert's mind went blank. Completely, utterly blank. Every assumption he'd built over decades of cynicism crumbled like sand castles before a wave. This boy, who had nothing, who wore patched clothes and lived in poverty, wasn't stealing. He was caring. He was helping. He was showing compassion to a stranger who had more money than the child could possibly comprehend. Then Ethan did something that shattered Robert's world completely. The boy knelt beside the leather recliner, his small frame folding down onto the marble floor. He clasped his hands together, small fingers intertwining, and Robert heard him whisper a prayer into the silence of the study. "Dear God," Ethan's small voice quavered in the silence, "please don't let this man die. His family probably loves him a lot. My daddy died and it made Mama cry every night. Please don't make this man's family cry. Even if he's really rich and doesn't know us, everybody deserves to not die. Amen." The words hung in the air like smoke, impossible to ignore, impossible to dismiss. Robert Kensington, the man who believed everyone was corrupt, who trusted no one, who had built walls around his heart so high that nothing could penetrate them, felt a tear slide down his cheek. Just one tear at first. Hot. Unexpected. It traced a path down his face, and Robert couldn't stop it. Couldn't control it. For the first time in decades, his iron grip on his emotions failed completely. This isn't real, his mind scrambled desperately. This is manipulation. A con. Children can be taught to act. This is just another game, another angle, another. But the prayer had been too real. Too raw. Too genuine. No one could fake that kind of innocence. No one could manufacture that kind of pure-hearted concern. Everything Robert believed about human nature was crumbling. Every cynical assumption, every bitter conclusion, every wall he'd built brick by brick over years of betrayal. All of it was collapsing under the weight of a 7-year-old boy's prayer. He couldn't maintain the charade anymore. The mask was cracking, splitting apart. His hand moved involuntarily to wipe the tear from his cheek, breaking the illusion of sleep completely. Ethan gasped. "Sir, you're awake." Robert expected fear. Expected the boy to scramble away, to look guilty, to show some sign that he'd been caught doing something wrong. But Ethan's voice was filled only with relief. Pure, overwhelming relief. "Are you okay?" the boy asked urgently, leaning closer. "Do you need medicine? Should I call 911? No fear of being caught where he shouldn't be. No worry about punishment. Just concern for a stranger he thought might be dying." Robert slowly opened his eyes fully, blinking against the dim light of the study. He looked at the boy kneeling beside his chair, and his breath caught in his throat. Ethan was small for 7, too thin, the kind of thin that came from not enough meals. His t-shirt was at least one size too small, the fabric stretched tight across his shoulders, the hem riding up to show a strip of his stomach. His jeans had patches on both knees, carefully sewn by someone who couldn't afford to buy new pants. His shoes were held together with duct tape at the toes, the original fabric worn through from too much use. But his face. God, his face showed nothing but concern. Wide eyes filled with worry. Small hands clasped together anxiously. A child who had just prayed for a stranger's life and was genuinely relieved to see him wake up. Robert's gaze moved from the boy to the money on the table, untouched, protected, pushed to safety, to the worn hoodie draped over his expensive Armani suit like a precious gift. Back to Ethan's eyes. He saw no greed there, no calculation, no hidden agenda or ulterior motive, only pure, innocent compassion. The kind of compassion Robert had convinced himself didn't exist anymore. Robert's voice caught in his throat, thick with emotions he couldn't name. I'm fine, son. Oh, good. Ethan's entire face lit up with relief, a smile breaking across his features like sunrise. I was really worried. You were breathing like my daddy did when he was in the hospital. I didn't want you to be sick too. Robert sat up slowly, his movements stiff. He still clutched the child's hoodie in his hands, the damp fabric warm from the boy's body heat. The question escaped before he could stop it, before he could calculate whether it would reveal too much. Why didn't you take the money? Ethan looked confused. Take it, but it's not mine, sir. He glanced at the money on the table as if the question itself didn't make sense, then looked back at Robert with those impossibly earnest eyes. Mama says we never take what isn't ours, no matter how much we need it, Ethan explained simply, as if reciting a fundamental truth like gravity or the sky being blue. She says our character is worth more than money. Our character is worth more than money. Robert stared at this child who had nothing, absolutely nothing, and yet had just offered him everything that mattered. Warmth, protection, prayer, concern. Things that couldn't be bought or traded or leveraged in business deals. Things Robert had forgotten existed. Something shifted in Robert's chest. Something that had been frozen for so long he'd forgotten it could move. And then, for the first time in 20 years, Robert Kensington smiled. Not the cold, calculated smile he deployed in boardrooms. Not the false smile he wore at charity galas. A real smile that started somewhere deep inside and worked its way up until it reached his eyes, crinkling the corners, making him look younger somehow. What's your name, son? Robert asked gently, his voice softer than it had been in years. Ethan Williams, sir. The boy's expression turned apologetic. I'm sorry I'm here. The school closed because of flooding, and Mama had no one to watch me. I tried to be quiet. I really did. Ethan, Robert said softly, still clutching the boy's damp hoodie. You have nothing to apologize for. Nothing at all. A moment passed between them, brief but profound. A connection forming across a chasm of wealth and circumstance that shouldn't have been bridgeable, but somehow was. Robert saw himself reflected in Ethan's eyes, and for the first time in decades, he didn't recognize the monster he'd become. His mind drifted to Jennifer, his own daughter. When was the last time she'd shown concern for his well-being? When was the last time she'd called just to check if he was okay? She was 32 years old, and Robert couldn't remember a single instance of her offering him something without expecting more in return. But this 7-year-old boy, this child who had every reason to be selfish, who had every justification to take what he needed, had chosen compassion instead. Robert opened his mouth to say something. He wasn't sure what, maybe thank you, maybe I'm sorry, maybe you've just changed everything I believe, when the study door burst open with sudden violence. Grace rushed in, breathless and wild-eyed. She must have run from the kitchen. Her face was pale, drained of all color, her eyes wide with terror. She saw Ethan standing beside the awake billionaire. Saw her son's hoodie clutched in Robert's hands. Saw the money on the table. And Robert watched as every horrible possibility played across her face in rapid succession. Her hands flew to her mouth. Her body went rigid. Mr. Kensington, I am so sorry, Grace began, her voice trembling with panic. Robert held up his hand, silencing her apology. But Grace couldn't stop. The words tumbled out in a desperate rush, tripping over each other in her panic. He didn't mean anything, sir. I told him to stay in the corner. I told him not to move. I don't know why Please, Mr. Kensington, I'll take him out right now. We're leaving. I'm so sorry. So sorry. She moved toward Ethan, her hands reaching for him like he was standing in traffic. Her fear radiated visibly. Not the fear of facing a monster, but something worse. Fear of him. Fear of Robert Kensington, the man who held her livelihood in his hands, who could destroy her life with a word. Grace grabbed Ethan's arm, trying to pull him away from Robert's chair. "Come on, baby. We have to go. Now." "But Mama, he was sick," Ethan started. "Shuh. Not another word." Robert watched this unfold with growing horror. Not horror at them, but at himself. At what he'd become. At the terror he inspired in people who depended on him for survival. Grace wasn't afraid because she'd done something wrong. She was afraid because she was powerless, and he had all the power. The dynamic was suddenly, painfully clear. Wealthy man sitting in his penthouse study. Desperate mother who worked 3 jobs and still couldn't get ahead. A woman who would lose everything if he decided to fire her. And she knew it. God, she knew it. "Sir, we didn't touch anything," Grace pleaded, her voice breaking. "I swear on my life. We're leaving right now. Please don't fire me. Please. I need this job. I need it so badly. I'll work extra hours. I'll do anything. Just please." Her eyes were welling with tears, her whole body shaking. She clutched Ethan against her side, both of them backing toward the door like cornered animals. Robert stood slowly, still holding Ethan's hoodie in his hands. The damp fabric felt impossibly heavy now, weighted with meaning he was only beginning to understand. He looked at Grace, her face pale and terrified. At Ethan, confused but protective of his mother. At the money on the table, exactly where Ethan had pushed it to keep it safe. A long, tense silence filled the study. The rain had slowed to a gentle patter against the windows. The piano concerto had ended, leaving only the sound of Grace's ragged breathing. Grace's tears spilled over, running down her cheeks. She was waiting for the axe to fall, waiting for the punishment, waiting for her world to end. Inside Robert's chest, a war was raging. His old self, the cynical billionaire who tested people and expected the worst, screamed that this was weakness. That showing mercy was showing vulnerability. That he should fire them both and prove his point about human nature. But something new was fighting back. Something that had been awakened by a 7-year-old boy's prayer. Something that recognized the monster he'd become and recoiled from it. Robert reached out and picked up the stack of bills from the table. $3,000. His trap. His bait. His proof of human corruption. Grace's face went even paler, if that was possible. She thought he was going to accuse them of trying to steal it. She squeezed her eyes shut, bracing for the blow. "Sir, I swear we didn't." Robert held the money in his hand, looking at it. Then at Ethan's hoodie in his other hand. Then at the mother and son huddled by the door. His expression was unreadable. The silence stretched on, unbearable. Ethan stepped slightly in front of his mother, his small body trying to shield her. A 7-year-old boy trying to protect his mother from a billionaire's wrath. Robert's throat tightened. When he finally spoke, his voice came out quiet, thick with emotion he could no longer contain. "Grace," Robert said, and she flinched at the sound of her name. "Your son just taught me something I'd forgotten." Grace looked up, confusion mixing with fear in her eyes. "I wasn't asleep," Robert said quietly, each word deliberate. "I was testing you both." The confusion on Grace's face shifted to something else. Something that looked like hurt. "You were testing us?" "Yes." Robert set the money down on the table, his hand trembling slightly. "I'm a bitter old man, Grace. Over the years, I've been betrayed by almost everyone I've trusted. My ex-wife, my business partner, even my own daughter. I've come to believe that everyone has a price. That given the opportunity, everyone will choose greed." He gestured to the money on the table. "So I set traps. I leave money out, pretend to be asleep, and I wait to see what people will do when they think no one is watching. I've done it dozens of times." His voice dropped. "And until today, I was always proven right." Grace pulled Ethan closer, her expression shifting from fear to something more complex. Anger, hurt, disappointment. "You were treating us like rats in a maze." "Yes," Robert admitted, shame flooding through him. "That's exactly what I was doing." He looked at Ethan, and his voice began to break. "But your son, he didn't take the money. He covered me with his jacket because he thought I was cold. He thought I was sick, maybe dying. He protected my money from falling off the table. And then, Robert's voice cracked completely. Then he knelt beside my chair and prayed for me. He prayed that I wouldn't die because he didn't want my family to cry like his mama cried when his daddy died. Tears were streaming freely down Robert's face now. He didn't bother to wipe them away. I have everything, Grace. Skyscrapers that touch the clouds. Banks that move billions of dollars. More money than I could spend in 10 lifetimes. But I'm poor. He pressed his hand to his chest. I'm so poor. You have nothing. You work 3 jobs just to keep a roof over your heads. Yet you raised the richest young man I've ever met. Grace stood frozen, processing his words. Her grip on Ethan loosened slightly as understanding began to dawn on her face. Robert stepped forward and gently handed Ethan back his hoodie. The boy took it, looking between his mother and the billionaire with wide, uncertain eyes. Then Robert picked up the stack of bills from the table. He held the money out toward Grace. "This is yours," he said firmly. Grace shook her head immediately. "No, sir. I don't want your money. I just want to work. I want to earn." "It's not charity," Robert interrupted, his voice gentle but insistent. "It's payment. Payment for the lesson your son just taught me. A lesson worth far more than $3,000. Grace stared at the money, her hand trembling. Her gaze dropped to Ethan's shoes, held together with duct tape, to his patched jeans, to his too small shirt. "Please," Robert said softly. "Buy him a warm coat. Buy him shoes that fit. Buy yourself something too. You've earned this, Grace. Not through cleaning my penthouse, but through raising a boy who knows that character is worth more than money." Grace's hand slowly reached out. She took the money with trembling fingers, tears streaming down her face. "Thank you," she whispered. "Thank you so much." Robert felt something shift in his chest, something painful and healing at the same time. He looked at Ethan, who was watching him with those impossibly earnest eyes. Moving slowly, Robert lowered himself to one knee. The motion was painful. His 60-year-old joints protested loudly, but he needed to be at eye level with the boy. Needed to look at him as an equal, not from the height of wealth and power. "Ethan," Robert said, his voice steady now despite the emotion churning inside him. "I have a proposition for you. I'd like to hire you." Ethan's eyes went wide. "Hire me, sir?" Grace looked equally shocked. "Mr. Kensington, he's only 7. Robert held up his hand gently. "I don't need him to clean or cook. I need something much more important." He looked directly into Ethan's eyes. "I need someone to teach me how to be a good person again. I need someone to remind me that kindness exists, that compassion is real, that not everyone is corrupt." He paused, letting the words sink in. "How would you like to come here every day after school? You can do your homework in this study. We can talk. Maybe you can help me remember what I've forgotten about being human." Robert glanced up at Grace. "And in exchange, I'll pay for Ethan's education. All of it. Private school. Tutors if he needs them. College. Everything." Grace's hand flew to her mouth, fresh tears spilling over. "I'll also give you a raise, Grace," Robert continued. "And a promotion. You're no longer a housekeeper. You're my household manager. Better hours. Better pay. Health insurance. Everything you need." He looked back at Ethan. "So what do you say, Ethan? Will you help a grumpy old billionaire learn how to see the good in the world again?" Ethan looked up at his mother. Grace was crying openly now, but she was nodding, unable to speak. Ethan looked back at Robert and smiled, that same gap-toothed, genuine smile that had broken through Robert's cynicism. "Okay, Mr. Robert," Ethan said. "I can do that. Deal." Robert extended his hand. "Deal." Ethan placed his small hand in Robert's large one, and they shook. Ethan's eyes widened. "Hire me, sir?" "That's right," Robert said, still kneeling at the boy's level. "I want you to come to the penthouse every day after school. You can do your homework right here in this study. We can spend time together. Talk. Maybe play chess. Whatever you'd like." "But what would I do?" Ethan asked, his brow furrowing with confusion. Robert smiled, that genuine smile that still felt new and unfamiliar on his face. "You'd teach me, Ethan. I need someone to teach this bitter old man how to see goodness again, how to trust, how to believe that kindness still exists in the world." He paused, his voice growing softer. "In exchange, I'll pay for your education. All of it. The best private school in Manhattan. Tutors if you need them. College. Graduate school if you want it. Everything, all the way through. Ethan looked up at his mother, uncertainty and hope warring on his young face. Mama. Grace was crying openly now, tears streaming down her face as she nodded. She tried to speak, but no words came out. She just kept nodding, her hand pressed to her mouth. Ethan looked back at Robert, and that gap-toothed smile broke across his face like sunrise. Okay, deal. Robert extended his hand formally, as if they were sealing a multi-million-dollar business contract. Deal. Ethan placed his small hand in Robert's large one, and they shook. Billionaire and 7-year-old, sealing a partnership that would change both their lives. Robert stood slowly, his knees protesting, and turned to Grace. And you, Grace, you're no longer a housekeeper. As of today, you're my household manager. Better hours, better pay, full health insurance, and paid time off. You shouldn't have to work 3 jobs. One should be enough. Grace finally found her voice, though it came out as barely a whisper. Mr. Kensington, I can't, thank you. Thank you so much. No, Robert said firmly. Thank you. Both of you. You've given me something far more valuable than I could ever give you. 6 months later, the Manhattan penthouse was a different place. Every afternoon at 3:30, the sound of small footsteps echoed through the marble hallways. Ethan would burst into the study, backpack bouncing, full of stories about his new school. Robert would look up from whatever business document he was reviewing, and his face would transform with genuine pleasure. They did homework together at the massive mahogany desk. Robert helped Ethan with math problems, rediscovering the simple joy of teaching. Ethan helped Robert with something far more important. He taught him how to laugh again. Real laughter, the kind that came from the belly and made your eyes water. The study was no longer cold and intimidating. Grace had added plants, real ones that needed watering and care. Ethan's artwork decorated one wall, colorful drawings that Robert had carefully framed. A chess set sat perpetually ready on a side table, mid-game. The room felt lived in now. Warm, like a home rather than a mausoleum. One Saturday afternoon, Robert's daughter Jennifer visited the penthouse for the first time in months. She walked into the study and stopped short, shock written across her face. Her father was on the floor, actually sitting on the floor, helping a young boy build something elaborate with Lego blocks. Robert was laughing, his hair slightly mussed, looking more relaxed than Jennifer had seen him in years. "Dad," she said uncertainly. Robert looked up, his smile not fading. "Jennifer, come in. I want you to meet someone." He stood, brushing off his pants. "This is Ethan Williams." "Ethan, this is my daughter, Jennifer." "Hi," Ethan said brightly. "Do you want to help us? We're building a skyscraper." Jennifer felt a strange pang in her chest, something that might have been jealousy. But as she watched her father interact with this child, saw the genuine warmth in his eyes, the jealousy softened into something else. Relief, maybe. Or hope. Grace appeared in the doorway with tea, and Robert introduced her with obvious respect. "Jennifer, this is Grace Williams, my household manager." And Ethan's mother. Over the next hour, Jennifer watched her father transform before her eyes. He was patient with Ethan. Kind. Engaged. He asked questions and actually listened to the answers. He smiled constantly. This wasn't the cold, distant man she'd grown up with. This was someone new. Someone better. When Ethan and Grace finally left, Jennifer turned to her father. "Dad, what happened to you?" Robert looked toward the doorway where they'd disappeared, a soft smile on his face. "I was saved," he said simply. Another rainy afternoon, months after that first encounter. Robert sat in his leather recliner, the same one where he'd pretended to sleep that day, reading a book. Ethan was at the desk, working on his homework, pencil scratching across paper. Rain drummed against the floor-to-ceiling windows, just like it had that transformative day. But now the sound was comforting rather than ominous. Ethan looked up from his homework, noticing Robert seemed deep in thought. "Mr. Robert, are you cold? Do you need my hoodie?" Robert's eyes crinkled with laughter, real, genuine laughter that filled the room. "No, son. For the first time in years, I'm warm." And he was. Deep in his chest, where ice had lived for decades, there was warmth now. Real warmth that no amount of money could have bought. Robert thought about that rainy day 6 months ago. How he'd set a trap to catch a thief. How he'd been so certain that his cynical worldview would be confirmed once again. How spectacularly wrong he'd been. That $3,000 had been the best investment he'd ever made. Not because he'd given it away, but because of what he'd received in return. A reminder that goodness existed. That compassion was real. That not everyone was corrupt. Ethan had saved him. A 7-year-old boy with nothing had saved a billionaire who had everything. Robert watched Ethan work on his homework, tongue poking out slightly in concentration, and felt his heart swell with an emotion he'd thought was dead. Love. Not the transactional kind. Not the conditional kind. Just pure, simple love for this remarkable child who'd looked at a stranger and seen someone worth saving. Ethan had taught him the most valuable lesson a billionaire could learn. That true wealth isn't measured in bank accounts, stock portfolios, or real estate empires. True wealth is measured in the goodness of a human heart willing to give everything, even to a stranger who had everything but needed it most. Outside, the rain continued to fall. Inside, Robert Kensington smiled, warmed by a wealth he'd finally learned to recognize. The end.
If this story touched your heart, don't let that feeling fade. Like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share it with someone who needs a reminder that goodness still exists in the quietest moments. Leave a comment and tell us what part of Ethan's choice stayed with you the most. And when you're ready, click the next story on your screen, because there are more stories waiting that remind us what real wealth truly is. See you there.